Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hello there. How you doing? Hopefully good on this Friday morning or afternoon or evening or whenever it is that you're listening to this one. Hope it finds you well. It's going to be a short intro, and I mean it this time. I'm in the middle of 1,001 things relating to house moves, extensions and all of that stuff, so I'm trying to maximize my time and be to the point, so I'm going to save some time here. Last week's episode was with Dr. William Binder, a cosmetic surgeon, a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills. What does that evoke when you hear that? Maybe the actual conversation brings out an awful lot of different topics even than you would imagine. So check it out. It came out last Friday, doing really well. It actually done very well in the US, given I suppose that it is a US guest, and saw some chart positions in the US charts for education. Hadn't ever got in there before, but that's interesting to see and nice, of course. So this week's episode is with another entrepreneur of sorts, and he's actually a serial entrepreneur, a serial CEO. His name is Rana Gujral, and we connected a few weeks back. The reason I was very interested to talk to Rana was because of obviously his success and his ability to invest in positive outcomes, but also the area that he's now focused on with his new organization around emotional intelligence. And as you might know, if you listen to the podcast or listen to me bang on about EQ or EI, it's an area of fascination for me, and I believe fundamental to how we can improve and get better if we develop our emotional intelligence. So I was interested to see what his company Behavioral Signals are doing in this space, and it's very much focused on creating an artificial intelligence engine that introduces emotional intelligence into speech recognition technology. So that's me kind of reading a little bit of a blurb about it. And I was fascinated to see how that would work, or get examples or scenarios of how that would work. And Rana shared some of the work that they're doing in this space. Very, very interesting, exciting time, obviously, for AI, but trying to crack emotional intelligence will be a big challenge, a big hurdle, but they seem to have made some great progress in it already. I learned a lot about Rana as well, about his career, about his successes, his failures, how he's always learning, and interesting to see that self-awareness and reflecting are massively important to him as he continues to grow and improve and get better. So lots of useful insights, lessons learned, takeaways that you could hopefully take on board and put into practice yourself in your own endeavours, whatever they might be. So I'll leave it there. Enjoy this one with Rana. Thanks for checking it out. As always, like, follow, share if you think it's of value. Only if it's of value. If it's not, let me know what could be done to make it more useful. Thanks a million and enjoy. Good luck. Hey folks, welcome to 1% Better, the podcast all about trying to help folks improve, potentially by 1% or more, through the interviews I have with my guests. And in this one, I've been excited to talk to this week's guest for a while. So Rana Gujral, thanks for coming on to the podcast. I'm excited about your bio as an executive, a speaker, investor, and most recently CEO of Behavioral Signals.
That's correct.
So looking forward to hearing your story. And what I suppose sparked the most interest for me is the role of emotional intelligence within behavioral signals and how that works with AI. As an executive coach and somebody that's fascinated about EQ, I'm very interested to hear how this plays with AI. So looking forward to hearing your story.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me here. I really am looking forward to this talk.
Good. Hopefully I'll spark something off that you haven't thought about as well. That's always my objective, for sure. So one question I like to ask recently, what's the most recent thing you've learned? Is there something you've learned in the last day or week that stands out?
Oh, wow. Oftentimes oftentimes it's just reflection back of things which I've learned back in the day, and oftentimes it's sort of like, slowing down. It's funny. I mean, you asked me this question just like yesterday. I was reflecting. Someone asked me, "Hey, we've learned a bunch of things from the things that you've written." And I've been writing for the last few years a bunch of articles out there, and most of those things have been about my life experiences as an entrepreneur, things I've done, successes, failures, and everything in the middle. And so someone sort of referred to an article about how I almost, the title was how I almost killed my startup. And I sort of talked about a few big mistakes, which I did, but we recovered from it and we still succeeded despite of it. And I was like, I got to go read that again. Hopefully I'm not doing those things again today. And so I was like, I stopped everything. I sort of looked up and searched that article and I read it end to end. This is what I wrote a couple of years ago. I was like, I just want to make sure that the things I wrote about, I'm not doing that today currently. So for me, it's a little bit of continuous sort of reflecting back and recycling, reprocessing, making sure, it's about making new mistakes, right? So I don't want to make the old mistakes again. So it's there's really that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know it answers it nicely, and I think self-reflection definitely is going to be hopefully something we talk about during this, especially as it links to emotional intelligence. Your point about reading an article you've wrote a couple of years ago, I kind of have done the same sort of thing recently, and it's hard to ever be completely, whatever you're writing at that moment in time, things can change a couple of years down the road. And I would imagine in your world, if you're writing a lot and journalists pick up an article that you wrote 2 years ago and you said, but you said this and now you're saying something different. Do you find your kind of views alter and change?
Yes, for sure. I think the views change because, our perspectives change and our abilities change and our abilities to process information changes. And so the views changes accordingly. And I feel, it is really what makes us or gives us this unique ability to see the opportunities that we see it. It's the life experiences, and it doesn't have to be all good ones, right? I mean, oftentimes it's the tough things that you have done or you've been through, and you sort of your upbringing or sort of like your scenarios which you have dealt with in the past, that allow you to see a certain situation very differently from the next person, and that allows you to then process that information differently. And that's your perspective and view. And then what you do with it is really what translates into when you say capitalizing on an opportunity or grabbing an opportunity. Well, not everyone sees those opportunities the same way, or not everyone even sees those situations as an opportunity. Or something to course correct on, or as a point of failure. I mean, it doesn't have to be all opportunities. So I think it's a process of continuous evolution. I mean, for me, it's a process of continuous reflection on where I've come from, what I've achieved, where I'm going, where I'm headed. How do I view the goals that I've had over the years? Have they changed? Do I still want to do that? Am I still working towards the things that matter to me at this point of time? And oftentimes the answer is no. I mean, the goal that you think you have, that doesn't really matter to you. It's not really appealing, or maybe it was a big deal a few years ago, and at this point, so then you reflect and say, okay, then what are you working towards? And, so for me, it's, absolutely. That's definitely something which I do a lot.
Very good. I find myself nodding a lot. I think I'm going to agree with you. I'm trying to too much probably all the way through this. So maybe just take it back to when you were a young boy. You're originally from the UK. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in India. My dad was in the armed forces, so we never really stayed in one city for more than a few years. So I was like all over the map. I did my early schooling out there, and then I've been in Australia, I've been in Japan, I've been in UK, mostly due to different work assignments and some of my education pursuits. And then I've been in Boston for many years. I've also lived in Canada. Now I'm in San Francisco. I'm in the Bay Area, to be exact.
to be exact. No, very good. Because when I was doing a bit of research, I had noticed, I think you went to university in the UK. Was that where you did your first degree?
Yeah, so it was a funny thing. So, I was doing my undergrad, and it's sort of been that example is reflective of how I've led my life. When I did my undergrad was in computer science engineering, and that was my calling, that was my passion, that's what I wanted to do. But like halfway through it, I realized that there's a lot of other exciting things I'm not really learning, which is things around business and sales and marketing. And I didn't want to wait until I graduated. So I actually signed up this program from, TAC UK, which was this sales and marketing program, which I did sort of as a night school. And then after I graduated, I had this opportunity to be in UK to sort of finish that up and wrap that up. And that kind of what led me to, towards that experience.
Okay, very good. So when was the first time you became aware of emotional intelligence, or even what that might have been termed, 20 years ago or so?
So, to be honest, I mean, what we do at Behavioral Signals is really processing emotions on speech data. And we apply it in different ways. We bring an aspect of emotional intelligence to human to machine conversation, and an aspect of emotional intelligence to a lot of specific business use cases. But emotional intelligence is it's a much bigger sphere of research or understanding, or the scope is pretty large. I mean, it transcends into an aspect of core intelligence, like, either it's EQ or EI, in terms of sort of like, are we emotionally aware? And it's definitely something, in terms of like, a market opportunity, or as a potential for a startup or a business, I definitely haven't been aware of it until more recently when I came across Behavioral Signals. It's something which I have watched closely, in the sense, like, if you look at what's happening in voice interactions, and this is an area which I'm quite passionate about. Voice interaction is the next big thing for artificial intelligence. It's the experience, it's the interaction that is tremendously powerful in many ways. It's because it's the most natural way for humans to interact with anything, with anybody, right? You could type or you could touch, and touch is definitely better than typing because it's a little bit more natural. And that's why we've seen sort of the advent of smartphones, which are pure touch, and other touch experiences. But voice is even more intrinsic, right? Everyone speaks, and everyone likes to communicate each other by just speaking. And so for what's happened in the voice and the speech industry, there's multiple parts to it, right? And so there is the core linguistics, which is the NLP and NLU, which is the processing of the natural language and understanding it. And that about 5 to 7 years ago wasn't necessarily something which you could say was very accurate. But fast forward, it's state of the art. It's superbly accurate. It's predominantly accurate. It's something which you could take it to the bank. It's even more accurate than humans process often at times. And then the other part has been building specific context engines around, hey, how do you apply that to, say, a doctor-patient relationship? That's very domain-centric. Or how do you apply that to, say, a contact center or a customer engagement vertical? That's very domain-specific. And that also has evolved tremendously over the last few years, and there are extremely sophisticated contexts and models and engines that have emerged. What is eluded AI, or what has eluded the core and the crux of the voice interaction over the last so many years, has been the concept of understanding emotions. Because when you're speaking, you are conveying emotions, and that's what I came across as the opportunity around behavioral signals, and that's superbly exciting to me because it's sort of it's the missing link. It's the missing link in the core voice interactions, whether it's human to human or it's human to machine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting. Just as you were talking through that as well, you're saying voice is the next big thing. When we're talking, obviously we have a lot of physical attributes going on, our gestures and our body language. Is there anything even in the early stages looking at how that is tying in? Because you express a lot of emotion with your body language. I'm pointing at you now, and that's just kind of jumped into my mind. It's just interesting. Is there anything looking at that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Conveying emotion, it's a multifaceted area of research. What we do at Behavioral Signals is we focus exclusively on speech data and human voice, and we basically use that to deduce human emotions. And there are other aspects of deducing human emotions, such as looking at facial expressions. We don't really tend to focus on that, and there's a specific reason why. There's a lot of research. In fact, the new research that came out by Yale that measured accuracy of deducing emotions through various means. And what it did was it started with voice data, and it deduced emotions using voice data using some of the technologies available out there, and it measured its accuracy. Then it added facial expressions. And so essentially, it was using the audio of a video, and then it allowed the whole video to be processed. So it allowed the audio to be processed and also the facial expressions of the speaker to be processed. And the accuracy of the emotions that were emerging in terms of how the various participants in the conversation is feeling actually went down. And you'd expect it to go up, but it actually went down. And the reason there being is that we as humans are fairly adept in masking our emotions through our facial expressions. And but we're not so good in terms of masking it through our voice and our tonality. And so if you're focused just on tonality, you actually have a better and more accurate read of emotion data. And so for us is we're applying a lot of this technology towards very specific human-to-machine interaction and also human-to-human interactions. And the vast majority of the data that we process is pure speech. And in fact, when there is video data available, it's preferred for us to use just the audio data because we get a better tone, better read on the sense of emotion that is being felt behind those words. So that's kind of what we do.
Okay. Very, very interesting. We'll come back to maybe a little bit more about your current role in a little bit, but I am very interested in your entrepreneurial journey, and that's something that I learn a lot from talking to folks like you. Was that something you were always destined to be, do you believe? And that whole debate of, are you born an entrepreneur? Is it something you developed? Is it a bit of both?
I don't think so. I don't know I know for sure I didn't have those insights or instincts that I see a lot of young entrepreneurs have today. And I'm very jealous. And it's like the one regret I have. I see like 18 and 20-year-olds who kind of have that crystal clear clarity that they want to be an entrepreneur. And they understand that it's going to be a longer journey, and oftentimes, some don't, but they actually have clarity around what they want to do. For me, it was a more traditional upbringing. It was around, hey, what am I passionate about? And I initially I grew up in a family of doctors, and so my initial passion was to go towards that field, and I prepped towards that in my early childhood. And then I realized that it's not something that passionates me anymore, or excites me anymore. And so I geared towards computer science. For me, and those early years was really pushing the boundaries on technology and building products and getting excited about what those products can actually do in real life context. I think I got some early opportunities and I grabbed those from an entrepreneurial aspect. And this was when I was still in the corporate setup. And those are opportunities around trying out something new, which hadn't been done before, taking a bet and sort of piecing it together end to end, and being responsible for it. And so it's almost kind of like doing mini startups. And, I had those early opportunities where someone took a bet on me and said, okay, you go ahead and make that happen. And I just loved it. And I understood this is really what my calling was. And so, that kind of gravitated me towards building out businesses and looking at other entrepreneurial opportunities rather than just sort of moving the needle on revenue growth.
Okay.
In a corporate setup. When
you're in the corporate environment and somebody's taking a bet on you and saying, go and have a go here, you have maybe a bit of that safety net because it's in a safer environment, as opposed to when you go out on your own and, there's more at risk or more to lose. How did you find that, and was it much different when you did take that leap out?
Yeah, look, I think you realize as an entrepreneur, and some realize that sooner than others, is that it's all about risk-reward ratio. And so, you could settle for a lower reward if your risk appetite is fairly low. And if you want to do bigger things and you want to make bigger bets, you got to have a much higher risk appetite. And risk appetite translates into assuming that you're going to fail and learning how you are going to deal with that failure and what you're going to do with that failure. Are you going to, pivot and, react to it and learn from it and then bounce back and do other things? And it's about, you mitigate that by measuring the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And so it's really my simplified way of saying is like, you test, and the test, the reason you call it a test is because you're looking for a certain outcome in a certain period of time. That's what a testing means from an experimental scientific standpoint. And it's not always scientific. It's a lot of gut feel, lots of subjective elements, but you're still testing. And tests also mean there's a finite amount of time where either you have achieved the outcome or you have not achieved the outcome. And the next step there should be either double down or discard. And so for me, it's testing a variety of different things and then getting to a point where I have to make that decision. Okay, is this something I'm doubling down on because I don't want to be in test mode anymore. I want to now really go all in, or it's done, discard, move on, go on, do something else. And so that's really, entrepreneurial initiatives, when you're doing a startup or you're looking at this or, you're doing other things. You're just sort of building out various businesses. It's really that. And it's sort of adapting to that risk mindset of, failure is part of it. You are going to fail because you're testing, and tests fail. Not every test is successful, and it's okay. It's more about doing as many as you can and then applying some sort of a rigor or approach towards selecting, what you want to test. And so that it's not a complete random process. So that's really a mindset. It's all about a mindset. And that it's way harder than it sounds because, you can't just adopt a mindset. It has to it's like love. You almost have to feel it. It has to come from inside you. It's not going to come in by listening to a TV show or a motivational speaker or reading a book. You have to feel it from inside, and you have to have that moment of reflection and say, okay, I'm good with this. I'm okay with that. For me, it came in much later. I wish it was when I was, 20. But
I know. Yeah. And again, I would talk to people about that and this whole, when is the right time, but from what I believed and the patterns I see emerging from talking to folks that are, the time is right when it is right and when it comes along, and those things you're learning along the way kind of build you up to that point to maybe give you that appetite or that intuition to go in that direction. Would you say your value set and value system growing up with your family in the medical world had given you something to lead towards this, or had been pushed you in a different direction?
I've definitely had a few core values that have been imparted into me that have been extremely helpful. And the values around work ethic, values around never doing something which is not your best, having a high expectation of yourself and others around you, and essentially shooting for the stars and, assuming that you could do anything. And those value systems that have been imparted into me. It's some of that has been sort of like, explicit, what my mother would tell me or what my father would tell me. But a lot of that has been also sort of like watching and learning from people around me. I mean, the unreasonable goals they've had for themselves and the fact that they've achieved it and how they have done it, and which sort of has led into that. I grew up into a family which has been not very entrepreneurial, though, right? I mean, I grew up in a family that has sort of charted very traditional paths of career growth. And so for me, I've always been scared of that in my initial years. It's something which has been unknown to me. And oftentimes it's also, I feel that, often education is a burden, in certain ways. I came in from a family that valued education over anything else. So I then doubled down on that. I mean, okay, I need to have X degrees taken care of, and I need to go to certain schools, and I need to teach myself more. And then once you have that, then you almost have this inert sort of burden to capital on it. And that's one of those things which I kind of see right now is that, you see certain people who in their early 20s or they're during the undergrad programs don't have that burden. They just don't feel like they need to. And they were like, okay, no, I'm going to go towards this calling. I look at that and I admire that quite a bit. I didn't have that, to be honest. I mean, for me, it was about making sure I checked off all the boxes, which were the traditional boxes. And only after I'd done that, I had the confidence to go venture out and do other things, because I had sort of proven those points. I've achieved success. I've climbed the corporate ladder. I felt that I've proven what I could do the traditional ways. And now for me, it was about, okay, well, what's next? What else can I do? I mean, so this kind of feels like I'm now getting into the territory of moving the needle. Even though moving the needle, it was a substantial effort and was financially rewarding, but it wasn't exciting enough for me. So it was, to be really candid, it was less of inherent calling, more about I was bored and it wasn't challenging enough, and it was not there's not enough of like what the next goal should be. And I was like, okay, I got to pick up something really scary and go after something really big. And once I did that, and then it's a drug. Then, you never want to look back.
Sure. And you talked about values, like the word freedom or control. What do those two kind of do to you when you kind of think about it and how it has an impact on you?
Yeah, I mean, freedom and control. I mean, I think again, it's more. I mean, most people feel that this is something which either it's a circumstantial thing. But I feel that when when you get to that next level of learning and understanding and enlightenment, you realize that it's actually a mindset. It's very internal. You define your freedom, and you define the control that you're limited by, or the control you need to have around surroundings. And that comes with maturity and time. I mean, it's for you to break free. I don't think the circumstances changes tremendously around you where now you have more freedom, or, you could say, hey, yeah, I'm gonna, I hear this all the time, right? It's like, hey, I want to do a startup. This is most thing. Like, I'm an active investor, so I meet entrepreneurs every day. And a lot of people are entrepreneurs who want to be an entrepreneur, and they're like, I want to do a startup. Like, especially when I'm interviewing candidates, they're all about, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? And the usual answer is, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to have my own startup. The question is, why not now? why are you here interviewing for this job? And the answer is, well, I don't think I can do that right now. I don't have the freedom, to make that happen. I want to do it when I have that down the line. I'm a little bit more financially secure. Then I want to be an entrepreneur. But you never. I mean, then you would have a family. Then you have other things going around you. You'd have those other things. So I think it's more about, it's a mindset. Whether you think that way or you don't think that way. And if you are going to be trapped in that lack of control and I don't have freedom mindset, you're going to be trapped when you're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. You're never going to break free.
And what was your point where you broke free? Because I suppose you were in some ways in the corporate environment, but there was, what you're saying there for me is it's almost like you're in a habit, or people get into a bad habit of being in the corporate world, and I understand it completely, but then you have to develop a new habit, develop the new mindset. What was the turning point for you? Was there a day you said, today's the day I'm just going this direction now? Was there like a standout moment?
I think there was a growing realization that I have to do something else. I don't think there was this one aha moment. I think it happened over a course of several years. There is this one learning which I've had. One of my early mentors had imparted onto me, which was that sort of wisdom around seeking chaos as an asset. And this whole phrase, which has now become grossly popularized by this dialogue delivery in Game of Thrones. But I mean, this has existed for many years. And I actually heard this 25 years ago by one of my mentors, is chaos is a ladder, seek it. So this mindset of you have two choices, right? I mean, say as a young, young engineer or young person who has two jobs. One is at a tier one company, which has the brand, which has the money, and you be working with some of the smartest people in the world. And the other job offer you have at hand is at an unknown, unproven startup. In fact, maybe even worse, it's a company that is falling apart. It's political, it's chaotic, it's a toxic, poisonous atmosphere, and they want to hire you to do some things in there. Which one are you going to choose? It's almost a no-brainer. Most people will choose the former. I mean, but where would you grow the most? Where would you make the most? Where would you be felt the most? And where would you add the most value? It's definitely the latter. Because, I mean, you'd be a cog in the wheel in the first setup because things are already great. I mean, you have the smartest people. You have the best processes. The company's doing great. And, yeah, you'd learn things, but you'd move the needle ever so slightly. In the latter, I mean, even a small improvement you make is going to get noticed, and you're going to get promoted, and you're going to be given more things to do. And even you learn from the toxicity and the negative environment. So I've always chosen that, always. Like, whenever I had those two choices. And so for me, I got to a point where, getting to a point where, from a corporate standpoint, those goals weren't exciting enough because it all kind of looked the same. It all kind of looked at take over that department or that business unit. You improve the processes and you tweak it, and you get the bottom line from X to Y, and it just wasn't exciting. So for me, it was like, okay, I got to do something else. I have to go build out something that hasn't been built before. I have to go make a dent in an area which hasn't happened yet. And so I was on a lookout. So for me, my startup adventure was I came across this company called Viva Systems, which was one of the biggest SaaS plays done by the co-founder of Salesforce. And they built the first vertical SaaS for the healthcare industry. It was a very successful startup. But what excited me the most about that was rather than building a traditional software system, which was horizontal, which could be applied to multiple verticals, he bet on a very specific vertical, studied that to the tilt, and went ahead to go solve problems for that space. And that's something which no one was doing prior to Viva. And it was like one of the first, successful vertical SaaS implementations. And I love that model. So I realized that, that's what I want to do. And I want to go disrupt a space that no one really cares about or people haven't noticed before. And it's not a problem that will be a big deal 10 years from now, like maybe, self-driving cars. But it's more around something which has existed for the last 50 years and no one solved it, or they've been solving it in a very ineffective way. And I want to go solve it, and I want to have an immediate impact. That's how I decided to do the startup. That's how I got out and did ties back in the day. For me, it was really sort of a culmination of a realization that I need a bigger challenge, and then finding that opportunity that I really understood and related to, putting it together and just, making it happen.
Very good. As you said, it's a drug. It's a kind of an adrenaline buzz, I'm sure you kind of you get from these sort of challenges.
Yeah.
When you've come into behavioral signals, do you have a traditional way when you get into an organization to look at it? Do you examine the vision and the mission and, the kind of traditional setup of a strategy, or have you your own approach? Is there a style you have?
I mean, for me, looking at the behavioral signals opportunity, number one was what are we up against? What is the bigger vision out here, and is that something guided by? That's the number one thing, which is like, what are we trying to solve? What are we aiming for? And is that a goal that I relate to intrinsically and deeply, and I want to dedicate the next, X number of years of my life to, because startups are like giving birth. I mean, you're scarred forever. I mean, it takes something off you, and it's not something you want to take lightly. I mean, I'm typically an all-in kind of guy. So if I'm in, I'm all in, 100%, 200%, and so I want to make sure that's the number one thing. So check on that. That was a big consideration for me, and I spent a lot of time evaluating that. And the other part was, well, who are the people behind it? I mean, do I relate to their mindsets? Do I relate to their experiences? I mean, the kind of team I would love to work with in tandem. And certainly, I was really amazed with all of those things, and those were sort of the big decisions for me to say, yeah, I'm going to come ahead and do this. Is this something I really, really personally relate with? And I feel the cause is really worthy, and the opportunity is really massive. And the people we're going to, the team we have in terms of, has the caliber to make that happen. And I feel if I were to do this today as a brand new startup, these would be the people I would work with, either co-found with or hire. And so that's actually amazing. I feel incredibly lucky that, those all click together, because it's a little bit too much to ask. And it did happen. And, I feel it's a really good fit.
Very good. Sounds like a great team set up there. Just as you have developed, I suppose, how do you deal with feedback, and how do you look to try and improve areas in you that aren't as strong as others? Is there a process you go through? Interested to know how you improve.
Yes, I mean, I think feedback is really important, and it's also very, very hard to effectively manage, because oftentimes, especially when you're the CEO, most people are very reluctant to give you feedback. And I think, certainly, I would do the traditional things, which is I'd ask people how they feel about it, and not just ask, but ask after I've built trust. So, it's really important to make sure you invest in that, because people are not going to feel comfortable to be vulnerable unless you have built trust with them, and you're not gonna penalize them, you're gonna punish them for concrete feedback. Well, personally, I'd say I don't put too much emphasis on that direct feedback, which I'd ask for, because I still feel that really, as a leader, you have to read between the lines. You have to be watchful of the cues. You have to see how people react to what you have said, their body language, their emotional response, and you have to dig deeper and probe into that. So if you're really curious as an individual of how someone feels about your decision, you have the answers right in front of you. Oftentimes you don't want to hear them, and you have the blockers on, and you don't care about it. And so I feel it's actually not very hard. I mean, if you're really sensitive to it, if you really want feedback on how you're doing, and how your decisions are being reacted to, or how people feel about the direction you're headed, people are telling that to you with loudspeakers on. I mean, they're giving you those cues in multiple different ways. A written, verbal, body language, and it's up to you to take that feedback and deal with it and react to it and learn from it. And it's also about, how you deal with interaction, right? Whether it is giving constructive feedback or it is, just sort of helping an employee feel more motivated. And those are the things where you get better. I mean, you react to certain cues and you understand, hey, how effective was meeting today? And I often come out of certain meetings and I say, okay, that's a C-. I mean, you really bunched that. I mean, those responses were not really accurate. And you could see how the other person took it. And so note to yourself, do better next time. And so it's a process of continuous learning. I mean, I put more emphasis on the latter, which is, taking in those cues and learning from that, versus relying on someone to explicitly tell me how I've done, because most people still hold back, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure they're probably afraid of getting the fire or something like that. But that is difficult at all levels of management and leadership, of being very open with your boss. I think it's a difficult one, and there's probably so many invisible boundaries that you just don't want to jump over. Have you ever had a flip it where you've had a CEO that you work for that you've actually been able to have an influence on them with feedback or other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with some really amazing leaders, people who have had a huge impact, and they've taught me a lot and they've influenced my thinking. And I feel in some parts vice versa. I think I've helped influence their thinking, and I've helped influence their mindsets in certain ways. But it doesn't always work that way. Not everyone is like, look, I mean, it takes a certain personality to, and this is more of a startup founder personality versus a CEO or a GM or a VP personality, because in the corporate, you are still trying to play by a playbook, and so it's a little bit, more traditional in terms of like how you think. And as a startup founder, you are opinionated. You have a very strong worldview, and it's almost sort of like, you are, you have a little bit of an obnoxious trait in you. You are a little bit of a jerk, and you are superbly intelligent as well, and you have certain abilities to read people. It's a combination of all of that. And, oftentimes it is, it's hard. It's hard to, it's just like, some of the successful founders often, put on those blinders and say, I'm not going to be influenced. I'm going to just follow my gut. I'm going to do what I want to do. Doesn't matter if I'm unpopular. Doesn't matter if people feel that I'm a jerk, or if I'm not doing it the right way. And I'm going to still go with my. And it's all about the outcome. It's all about achieving what I want to achieve, no matter how I've done it. So it's a little bit of, I'm not going to judge that. I'm not going to say, hey, who's a better leader? I mean, is Steve Jobs is a better leader, or is, Sundar Pichai is a better leader? Very two different personalities. They're up with different tasks. They have different goals ahead of them, and they're coming from different worldviews. And so they're both great leaders. And I think for me, it's when I'm working for someone in the past, I've tried to take the best they have. I've also, over the years, learned a lot of things of what not to do. It's like, I definitely don't want to do that. I don't want to come across like that, because I can, this person is completely oblivious of how that impacts someone like me, someone who's very close to that person, but they're just not aware, and how in turn that makes me feel about them. And so I've been sensitive to that, and I was sort of, okay, well, I would never want my executives to feel that way about me, someone who I would want to build trust with. So I think it's give and take, but it's, yeah.
It's good. No, it's good to hear the different angles on it. All the way through the conversation, you've talked about reflecting a few times, and emotional intelligence, self-awareness is very important. It's interesting now you're working with an organisation that has EQ heavily involved in it. Where has your self-reflection come from? Has it always been there? Is it something you've developed?
I think it's always been there. I think that's something which has been inside me from very early childhood, and I've always been very aware of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and sort of learning from that. And it's whether early on in my career, early on in my childhood, making those decisions around, hey, whether I want to be X or Y. Yeah, I mean, those are the expectations from the external sources, but what do I really want to do? And do I still want to do that? And, in terms of sort of like even my personal relationships early on. And so I think that's just been inside me ever since. And that has also led me to make those decisions I've made, whether it is the first job I chose or, the opportunities to pivot, which I took. It's been around, sort of always being in that reflective mode of what do I really want to do. It's been very calculative, I'd say. I mean, it's the decisions I've made have been mostly thought through and calculated versus just random bets. Then I feel, I mean, it might feel a little chaotic if you look at it from outside view, but I feel like, I've been working towards something at that moment of time. And then what I've been working towards might have changed. So then I've started to work towards something else. But the decisions I've made have been made with a purpose. And then I've reflected back on them and say, hey, did I achieve that or not? What did I get out of that? And did I get what I was looking to achieve, or did I get something else entirely? And that's just a process I continuously follow.
Do you make time in your day or week for that reflection? Or does it happen randomly, or do you, in a similar meditation type way, but do you block off time and say, I'm reflecting for this hour a day or whatever?
I do meditate, but I have to say that the reflection is, happening throughout the day in random spots. I mean, it could be while I'm driving back from a meeting, or it could be like, a few minutes before I actually pass out and I'm going to bed. And it's, or it could be simply in the middle of the day where I decide I need a break. I'm going to go get some alone time and just put on the headsets and just think. And it's reflections throughout the day. It's whenever it kicks in. For me, it's getting to a point where I've become aware of when it's happening, and then I would pay the due respect to that situation and that feeling and let it happen, versus let it pass, which is like, there's this thought in my head. I want to think about it. So I'm going to go ahead and find some time to think about it then and there, versus, oh, it just came and it's gone. And now I'm not even sure what that moment was. And so I think early on, I probably did a lot of those, and now I'm very, very sensitive to it. So there's a point of reflection. Then I feel it's a fleeting moment, and it's not tomorrow, not an hour from now. It's now. If you can do it now, you do it now, or else I'll write it down. So I write down a lot of things. And so if you look at my notebook, I actually have it open right now. It's just random thoughts in there. I mean, if someone would read it, it would make for some exciting talking points. It's just like different things in there, which is just randomly coming to my mind. I write it down and then I'll go back and read it and say, okay, do I still want to think about that? No, okay, scratch it, but it's there.
You mentioned the life of a CEO, a startup, entrepreneur. You're 100%, 200% in. How do you? There's no percentages left, but what? How do you balance being in and being out, and kind of just keep yourself stress free, or minimize the stress, or manage the stress?
Not very well.
You seem relaxed enough now, anyway. So.
I feel. I'm definitely in the modes when I'm stressed out. It's a matter of, I guess, being cognitive of those situations, and then and reacting to it and dealing with it, and then snapping out of it. That being said, I do not. In fact, there's a recent talk I did when someone asked me this question about this proverbial work-life balance. I do not believe in work-life balance. I just don't believe that exists. Instead, I believe in what I call seasons, which is there's a season for everything, and you focus on something and you give it your all, right? So I would tend to take on a specific task, and then I would put in a lot of time. So for me, the boundaries would blur between, hey, now I got to pull off this. I'm all in. And then when I'm spending time more on the family side, it'd be the same, right? It's like, okay, then things are off. I'm focused on that, and there's no time boundary. There's no time limit. I'm there. I'm going to give it my all, and let it play out. And so for me, it's sort of like, okay, taking on a specific goal at hand and an outcome which I'm trying to achieve, or a certain thing that I'm focused on, and then focused on that. And so I'm like, cycling through it. So there's a bunch of different priorities at hand. And it's about, taking a ball in hand versus juggling them throughout the day, taking a ball at hand and really focusing on that, then putting that ball away, picking the next ball up, and making sure all the balls get adequate amount of time, and making sure you cycle through everything versus juggling them continuously. And that's a difference. That's how I sort of visualize it, which is, no, I'm not juggling, because juggling means time slicing. Juggling means trying to balance, and you're never doing anything good, and you're dropping the balls all the time, and you're also never really accomplishing any of those things properly. So, with that, I have a method to my madness. That's how I deal with it.
Interesting. I read a book a couple of years ago called Deep Work. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Cal Newport is the guy, but he talks about focusing for it being 45-minute slots, or 4-hour slots, or 1 week slots, or 6 week slots when you're writing a book, and just totally dedicated on that task or those tasks at that time. Sounds something. I try to do something similar as well, but it's good to hear that insight. From a productivity perspective, do you have technology that you use, apps? Is there anything you use to be most productive? Keep notes that you mentioned there.
Yeah, in terms of apps, there are some favorites. I use LinkedIn quite extensively, and I use that as a very effective tool. I also tend to use certain apps on my phone to take notes and reminders, etc. I use Calendar very extensively. So for me, if you and I decide to talk for 15 minutes 2 months from now, it instantly go in my calendar, and you would get an invite, and then I'm done with it. Then I'll deal with it. And so I try to not. I try to also respect the calendar quite a bit. So which means I'm not going to randomly improvise and add things to my day. Things happen, but for me, moving things around and canceling appointments is more of an exception than a rule. And when that happens, where I've dropped the ball, it's usually because I committed time and I never put in my calendar or relied on someone to do that, and they didn't either. And now we're at that moment of time where I've not planned for it, and it's not going to happen because it's not in it. So, I mean, I tend to sort of, use that as stress relievers, because it's like I want to process as little things in my mind. I don't want to, burden myself about thinking what needs to happen today. It's like, let something else take care of it. I want to keep as much free thinking time on my, in my mind around other things. So any app which allows me to do that, which is delegate, put it in, organize, is my favorite. Those are a bunch of different things I do. I'm not sure what apps do I have. I mean, now I'm curious. It's the browser, it's the LinkedIn, it's the Messenger, it's Facebook, and all kinds of door opening apps.
Very, very good. Another one that tells me an insight to the person is inbox. Do you have an inbox 0 or an inbox 3855?
I don't. Somewhere in the middle. The 3,855 would freak me out, and 0 I think is unachievable. But I'd say I tend to gravitate closer to the 0 part than the 3,085. I have a method to that where there's an aspect of prioritization. And so I don't want to open up a thread which I can't focus on or can't proceed with. And so at any given point in time, I'm actually pretty good saying no, right? So say if someone starts an engagement, say, I'm sorry, not interested, or just simply not a priority right now. So I don't want them to send me emails or do that until when I'm ready. And so I like to keep the inflow controlled, because my goal is to get to 0, which I've never been able to do. But I'd say I'll tilt it towards that rather than the 3,685.
Okay, very, very good. I'm going to wrap it up. Just a last one or so. Books. I love books. I'm actually reading a book at the moment. 1 second. I said I'd get it. It's called Simple Habits for Complex Time. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Oh, wow.
One. It's quite good, but
not.
There's a lot of discussion in it around feedback and systems and whatnot that kind of informs my thinking, even when I'm listening to some of your answers there. Is there any book you would recommend that you've used maybe as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, that helped you along your journey, that stands out?
I'd say there's a couple that that have made a more substantial impression than, say, the rest. I think one of them is a book called The Goal from Elihu Goldratt, and that book is about a process improvement mindset. It's about prioritization. It's about focus, and it's really a very easy to read book, because it's a fable. It's a story, and it speaks to the concept of a chain, and everything, all the interactions in our life can be symbolized by a chain, and a chain, just by the nature of it being a chain, and it has links, has a weakest link. And so when you pull that chain, the weakest link is going to give in the first. And so you have to focus on that weak link first. And it's a process of how you identify that weak link and how you focus on that. And the thing is, as soon as you're focused and you've addressed that weak link and you have strengthened that, you have a new weak link, because there's always going to be a link that is now weaker than the link which you just strengthened. And so you focus on that instead. So I feel that book has served me in many different ways, from many different mindsets, which I feel has made quite an impression in how I've processed things and how I've dealt with things and I've thought through things. So I think that's a great book to read. I recommend that to anyone who's starting off in their careers and thinking through things. I think probably that's the most important one. I mean, more recently, I read this book, Ego is the Enemy. That was a wake-up call for me. I think that book touch very close to heart because when I first became an entrepreneur, I kind of just sort of, jumped into it. And then I had some initial successes, and I had, gravitated towards becoming an influencer. And then you have a platform where people want to hear you speak, and you're doing keynotes, and you have a fan following, and they're sending you email. And what happens is that suddenly you get to a point where the act of doing something actually is more satisfying than actually doing it. And that's kind of where sort of your ego kicks in. And I see that as such a common trap. And I've been there, right? So I was there after some of my initial successes where I was actually, just happy being in that role than actually doing it. And because it was so satisfying. I mean, you felt like, hey, this is where you want to be after you accomplish that, and now you're already there. So why would you want to do something? Why would you want to do a startup? Why would you want to build another business? The fame is extremely addictive and very corrosive, very, very corrosive, right? And so I think that book hit very close to home more recently. And that's a book which I've read recently, yeah.
Okay, two brilliant ones there. I haven't heard of either. I'll put them on my book page when we roll this one out. Fascinating journey into your story, I suppose. Really enjoyed listening to that, Rana. And I know we talked a bit about the new role. If you maybe want to call out a couple of things just to wrap up on behavioral signals and how people can get in touch with you and maybe learn more about the organization and what your plans are for the coming months, quarters.
For sure. Behavioral signals, what we do is, as I talked about it prior, we deduce human emotions through speech data. The question is, what do you do with it, right? So we have an emotion AI engine, and we deliver value towards a variety of different KPIs through what we call emotion as a service. We have a platform that is vertical agnostic. So when we apply that engine into the traditional verticals, such as contact centers, inside sales, customer experience, customer engagement verticals, we're looking to solve for problems that are very specific to those verticals, such as matching the right agent to the right customer, giving tools to an agent around how should they react to their delivery while they're speaking to a client on the phone live, or doing more complex things such as coming up with a very calculated signal of propensity to buy or propensity to pay. It is all processed by an emotion engine behind the scenes, analyzing the conversations, analyzing the intent, analyzing the emotion quotient in that exchange, and parsing that into very intelligent insights. Now, when we apply that engine towards very different verticals, such as healthcare, we're working with a company that is managing patients with depression, and they use the technology to predict a propensity for suicidal behavior. Now, when we apply it to robotics, we have certain pilots happening where we are making those social robots or companion robots be more human-like. So they're speaking to a human and they're interacting with a human, but their biggest burden is to be more like human. And to be more like human beings means being able to understand emotion and be empathetic and being able to react in a way that is conducive to that emotional state of mind. And so we work with those companies to make those interactions more human-like. And so we play in a different variety of different verticals. We're a team of researchers and scientists, and we have our emotion AI engine available to be used by any researcher, any academic organization. A lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of universities test it. And so it's available to download and to use. So go to behavioralsignals.com, and you could also look me up at ranagujral.com, and you get a link to that in there as well. So I'd love to. I mean, if you're working on a specific use case that you find this could be applied to, we'd love to talk to you.
Very good. I'm sure there'll hopefully be somebody if you will reach out as a result. It's a fascinating area. I can only imagine it's going to grow and grow, and you're sounding like you're in a happy place in a role you're excited about. So it's positive.
Very excited, very happy, very blessed.
Brilliant. Rana, thanks so much for spending over an hour. I appreciate it. Look forward to sharing this, and I look forward to keeping an eye on you and the organisation Behavioural Signals into the future.
Thank you, Rob. Again, much appreciative of your interest in having us here and having me here and giving me an opportunity to share my perspective. Thank you for that.
No problem at all. Have a great one. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care. Hey guys, just before you go, I'd love to hear from you if anything specific stood out from that episode, something you might take away and try and implement in your own personal or professional life to help make you that little bit better. On the other side, is there anything you think I could do better to make the show even more enjoyable, more impactful and maybe meaningful? So drop me a note, rob@robofthegreen.ie, or connect in on any of the social platforms at Rob of the Green. We also have a community on Facebook. Check that out. If you're really enjoying the show, maybe you could try and leave a rating or a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts app. Go in there, give us a rating, let us know how we're doing. That'll help with the ranking of the podcast up those charts. The more folks that potentially see it, because we're high up, the better. The more that might listen that never heard of it before. And the goal of the show is to try and reach more and more people and have that impact more and more. So that's down to you. Please do help me with that. I'm not going down the route of hiring podcast promoters, quote unquote, from other parts of the world, because they say they can help with the ranking, and I don't really believe them, or it's not very authentic. Help me do it in an authentic way. I'd really appreciate it. This year I'm going more all in on Patreon, so it's $3 a month. You can sign up, subscribe to Rob of the Green on patreon.com. That will give you access to Patreon only content. Nearly all the episodes of the 864 podcast are on there, and new ones will be added only there. The 1% Better show will have early releases there, but will still come out for free on robofthegreen.ie. There'll also be live shows this year, some phone-in shows, extra content. €3 a month will, hopefully, the more folks that subscribe, allow me to do more and more stuff on there, add more and more content. At the end of the day, that's the price of a pair of socks, maybe, that you might lose, or a coffee. One way or the other, it's up to you. If you want to join, you'll still get free stuff otherwise, but if you're enjoying what we're doing, help us grow, help us expand it. I'd really appreciate that. Adding new stuff onto the website all the time. There's an affiliates page under the Be Better drop down. Check in there. There's training courses that you can sign up to. More and more stuff will come in over time. Into season 3 now of this fun journey. Huge learning. Hopefully you're getting something from it too. Stick with it. Let's keep going. Enjoy the journey even more. Have a great day, week, weekend, and thanks for checking it out. Good luck.